This is Libby Road and the Sound Epistemology Podcast. On this episode of the podcast, we have Brendan Diamond as our special guest for the first time in our Esee 101 room on the Clubhouse discussion app. Brendan has a YouTube channel called Diamond Discussions, to which he uploads videos of conversations he has using street epistemology, and you'll find the link to that channel in the description. We had a great discussion and covered subjects such as the challenges in conducting street epistemology conversation, the advantages and disadvantages of using different platforms to conduct Esee, using Esee with someone who struggles with mental health, and we were also able to address some of the criticisms of Esee that were brought up in previous rooms. Let's go ahead and cut to the chase.
Welcome everyone to the Esee 101 room in the Street Epistemology Club. We are currently taking questions from people who are interested in learning about street epistemology. Today we have Brendan Diamond with us to help you answer all your questions on Esee. I'm also transmitting today from Honeymoon Coffee in Evansville, right behind the espresso machine. So if you guys hear some background noise, excuse me. So please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. We ask that you put yourself back down to the audience once your questions have been answered, so we can let the next person come back up. If you'd rather not ask or not come on stage, you can actually send me a back channel message, and I'll ask the question on your behalf. The back channel is the little paper airplane in the bottom right hand corner of the app, of the Clubhouse app. It's sitting right above the microphone. You can send me the back channel, or you can also tap on my profile and send me a message that way as well. And I'll ask that question on your behalf. This room has been created as a learning environment, and it is being recorded. Brendan, if you want to maybe just give the audience, tell them a little bit about yourself, and then we'll pass the mic to David.
Yeah, sure. So I came across street epistemology, I think how a lot of people did, just watching some videos on YouTube. Anthony Magnabosco is probably the most popular street epistemologist, as they're called sometimes. And while it did start in the atheist community, it's branched out a lot, I think, to be sort of a technique for conversations and critical thinking generally. I'm sure we'll get more into the definition of what street epistemology is. But for my personal exploration, I found out about the technique through these videos on YouTube, got involved in the Discord server where they have sort of practice sessions, and then became a content creator just over the summer, really just going out into the local park and interviewing strangers and having deep conversations, which has been pretty fun. So you can find me on YouTube, just Diamond Discourse. I only have a handful of subscribers, but I'm enjoying it for myself and my own growth. And I think street epistemology in general has such wonderful promise as a way to improve the world, and just improve dialogue across everything we do. And it's, for me, it's really changed a lot in how I communicate in many areas of my life. So there's a lot in there, but yeah, as way of introduction, I'm just a random guy who saw some videos on YouTube and then started trying it.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is David. I live in Olympia, Washington. right along the shores of the Puget Sound, the body of water near Seattle. And I am a student of street epistemology. And one thing I love about having these rooms is I'm able to meet some other street epistemology practitioners that I haven't been able to meet with or talk to or get to know. And so this is another room in which I get to do that with Brendan here. I think this might be the first time we've ever actually chatted audio-wise. So yeah, I'm really excited to have you here today, Brendan, to help us answer people's questions about street epistemology. So yeah, I'm just stoked that you're here and that you agreed to come be our guest today. Um, so I have a quick question. I was wondering, you said that learning and practicing street epistemology has had an effect on how you communicate. I was wondering if you had any examples of that, or if you wanted to kind of tell us a little bit more about that, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can speak in general and also give a few specifics. In general, it's kind of made me more mindful about conversations, and uh, that self-awareness, I think, has improved my ability to communicate. And so a specific example would be even just in a committee meeting, um, in nothing related to Esee particularly. I do some physics teaching, and so in one of these committee meetings, I used a technique from street epistemology, although it's common to many different uh, conversational techniques of just listening, active listening, and repeating back what you heard. And it I found it helping to clarify the goals that we were trying to achieve. So um, while I wasn't necessarily evaluating their confidence in a claim or anything like that, I find these elements really helpful. And then also, I have a couple young children, 4-year-old and a 9-year-old, and so by talking to them and about like asking them questions that will make them think about their own reasons for things, that's really changed my parenting style. Um, and I was always into trying to get my kids to sort of think about things and ask me questions, but I think it's given me a sort of a method for doing that as well. Now I can't take it too far though, because my son in particular, the 9-year-old, has definitely called me out when I get into my SE mode too much, and he's like, just says, "That was an obvious question. Why would you ask that?" So, so you have to be still uh, aware too of how you're using it, but that all comes with practice. So, those are just a couple examples.
That's interesting that your 9-year-old, okay, so your 9-year-old has like the SE radar, huh?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, my whole family. Yeah, my spouse knows when I'm doing it. Although, she's a little more patient with it and sees value in it as well. But yeah, my son will absolutely look for it, and sometimes will even give me false reasons just because he knows what the answer is. Like if I'm trying to ask him about something like, what do you think would happen if you continue to eat chocolate all day? And then he'll say something like, oh, well, I'll be perfectly healthy, Dad. Thank you very much. you know, so he knows what I'm doing.
That's awesome. Does he ever use it on you?
Oh yeah. It's improved his negotiation skills. He's picked up on it for sure, um, and also even with his little sister, my 4-year-old daughter, um, he has become a little better about talking with her and listening to her, because that's a lot of what Esee is listening. And likewise when he's interacting, I think, with his friends in school and things like that. So, and like I said, this is, Esee is just one more iteration of other methods like that come from counseling and even hostage negotiation techniques, things like this that really all have very common elements. I think the epistemology aspect and that critical thinking aspect is some of the area that that makes Esee a little unique among those. But yeah, it's definitely been beneficial.
Cool. And you said you have a YouTube channel where you upload some of your conversations that you have using street epistemology. Um, and Alfonso, I think last time you were able to put the link of our guest's
Yeah,
YouTube channel at the
I
top.
just I just asked Brendan on back channel, but I think because he's not following me, it's on requests. I asked him for the link to both his YouTube and his Discord.
Okay, cool. So
I
maybe
see it now. I'll get it to you.
yeah, in the meantime, yeah, we can put your YouTube channel's link at the top of this um room. That way people will know where to go to see your YouTube channel. I think that's a great feature.
Is it
And if you're
Diamond Discourse? That's what it was.
Yeah, that's right.
cool. Yeah, that way people can see where to go to see some of the SE conversations that you had. And with that, I was wondering what if you can kind of tell us a little bit about some of the main challenges that you face when having these conversations. Are you able to tell us a little bit about those and how you manage them?
Yeah, challenges I faced. So I could list them in a lot of different categories. So, like, are you thinking of uh, challenges during a conversation or initiating conversation, or technical challenges of content creation, or something else? Because there are challenges among all of those.
Yeah, and I guess you can take it wherever you think is most appropriate. So, for example, I asked this from Dolly when Dolly was our guest a few weeks back, and he basically said that the main challenge he had was just getting people to stop and uh, start having the conversation itself. So it could be something like that, or like challenges that you face once the conversation's already started. However you want to take it, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, I think um, early on, it was certainly partly just building up the nerve to even talk to people and go out and stand on a corner. That takes uh, a fair amount of confidence just to go up and, yeah, initiate conversations. And you have to be comfortable with lots of failure. And this is kind of like the hard way of doing Esee, in the sense that you are trying to have conversations with people you have no relationship with yet. For the most part, I'm talking with people just in parks. However, there's some advantages there because it allows you to have lots of practice without necessarily just ruining relationships or anything because you screwed up a conversation. You don't have to be. You can push a little more, I think, to challenge and get people to express their ideas without being concerned about consequences as much, although you should still be concerned about consequences. So I don't want to push that too much. The other challenges I would say is I have a tendency to just not be able to ask concise questions. Like I tend to ramble a little bit. So my own language skills, I think they're improving through practice, but it's one of these things that I'm hoping to observe evidence of that a year from now. If I go back and look at my videos from this summer and compare them to a year from now, I'm hoping that I'll be able to see some improvement there. I can't say that I've noticed it yet, but that can be just a communication challenge. Also, there's just time, because having a family, having a full-time job, finding time to get out and talk to people is one thing, and then finding time to actually edit and upload content is a whole nother deal. Fortunately, I have a person I met on Discord who's helping me edit a couple videos lately, so I'm hoping that'll improve things, that if I don't have to do much of the editing, the post-production myself, that would be huge. And yeah, I think other challenges I would say is just making sure that I'm not focused on one single claim that somebody says at the beginning, and letting my conversation partner sort of lead the way a little more, and being a little more flexible rather than trying to really restrict the conversation into a very structured way. I think that's something that comes with just experience as well. So yeah, there's a lot of improvements I hope to make.
And would you say it's easier, or I guess, let me rephrase the question. Is it more challenging for you to conduct SE with family and friends or with strangers?
I think it's easier with strangers in the sense that it's quite easy for me to just well, I shouldn't say it's easy to get someone to start talking, but just bringing up a topic out of the blue, like I'm kind of already bringing the topic up out of the blue, and I'm picking a setting of a park where people are taking their time, that it feels like, well, you're already starting up a conversation, so we can just pick a random topic that you're thinking about and start exploring your ideas about it. And with friends and family, like there's always something going on, and maybe we don't get as many opportunities to have deep conversations as we'd like to. And also there's that delicate balance, like I said, of the relationship's got to come first no matter what. So um, there's so much other context that comes along with doing SE with family, that um, that maybe that's a little more challenging. But at the same time, you would have a much higher success rate from a perspective of initiating a conversation, having an opportunity to initiate a conversation with a friend or family member. You might get 50% plus success rate in terms of having a conversation at all, whereas if you're asking strangers on the street, you might have 10% or less in terms of having that conversation at all.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm aware of quite a few creators that go out and have street epistemology conversations with people and then upload them onto their YouTube channel. I was wondering, what would you say sets you apart from other Esee practitioners?
Oh, great question. But I would say very little. Uh, I sort of asked myself, when I was thinking about whether I should create a channel or not, um, I weighed the pros and cons of it, and this was one of the things, is like, do I have anything more to offer? And I didn't feel particularly special or anything about that. I think a lot of people do a much better job, frankly. But I also had the attitude that more Esee is better, and that if maybe I can motivate someone else to do it as well, that would be worth it to me. If even a couple people are like, wow, this guy can do it and I can probably do it better, then that's great. That's kind of where I viewed it. And one thing that does concern me is like representation and diversity. This is a value that I kind of hold, and just have, from a perspective of, wow, there's another middle class white guy who has a lot of time on his hands. That is something that I worry about in the movement. But maybe that's not justified, and that's a belief that we could examine. I think that uh, there's something to be said for representation there, and from that perspective, maybe I shouldn't have a channel. But these are things I weigh, and came to the slight higher confidence to create a channel. I guess from other things that give me a somewhat unique perspective is my science background. I do teach physics and astronomy, so I have that training that may give some benefit. But I don't know. The people out there doing this are really spectacular.
You said you're a physics teacher?
Yeah, that's right. I teach at a local community college. I did graduate work in Florida State, so got to do some cool particle physics research, and yet, I didn't really feel well trained in the philosophy of science, and I kind of wish that was part of our training, because there was, like, I had never even really heard of Karl Popper in all of my education, and yet that is the foundation of modern science. So we kind of have to glean this stuff from osmosis, and so it's kind of like scientists are just out there doing stuff, right? And I think that having a little more theoretical background would be beneficial. But and then from the communication standpoint, that's another thing that you don't really get too much formal training on, even though as a scientist you do have to communicate all the time. You're giving presentations and things like that, and then as a teacher I'm giving class presentations. But it's something that Esee is one of these things that I feel like is filling in some of those gaps in what I consider my education.
That's awesome. So, okay. So sometimes when I talk to people, the idea of like quantum physics is like a reason that they go to support confidence in a particular claim. As someone with a physics background, does that ever have any effect on how you conduct a conversation, just having that that physics background with a claim like that?
Well, it might shift what questions I ask them about it. Like, I certainly would be curious about their knowledge of quantum mechanics and what would make them believe that it's having an influence. I watched a video recently that was referenced, that maybe quantum mechanics is the reason we can't have anything, that maybe nothing's true in the world, that there could be both an even and odd number of Tic Tacs. This was on the Being Reasonable podcast that Mark Solomon has. So to me, I would want to ask the follow-up question of, well, does quantum mechanics have an effect on the scale of the human brain, or how does that work? What's the mechanism behind that? Because I'm certainly not aware of any way for that to work. It's kind of like the idea for a particle in a box. You can have the wave function of the electron bleed out a little bit outside of the walls of the box, so to speak. But it's a very small probability that it can be outside the box. And when it gets to the macro scale, sure, there's a very minuscule possibility that I could reach my hand through a wall and that quantum mechanics would allow that to happen. But it's such a small probability that it basically wouldn't happen over trillions and trillions of lengths of the age of the universe. So there's some questions like that you could follow up with having a little more knowledge about quantum that I'd be interested in.
Cool. So you mentioned the Tic Tac Thought Experiment, and let's pretend that nobody here has ever heard of that. Can you give us kind of an outline of what that thought experiment is?
Sure. Anytime you run into a claim that's sort of questioning if there can be truth in the world, or what is true, it can be a good time to do this thought experiment, or an actual experiment, if you like. If you just have a box of Tic Tacs and you say, okay, well, let's take this box of Tic Tacs, and there's some number of candies in here. So I don't know the answer, and you don't know the answer, talking to your conversation partner. But do you agree that there is an odd or even number of Tic Tacs in this box? If we both have a number in mind, maybe you think it's even and I think it's odd, can we both be right? Can this be true for you that it's odd, and true for me that it's even, or vice versa? Or is there a truth outside of our personal belief? Does truth depend on your personal belief? So that's kind of where the Tic Tac test comes from. And I don't know who initiated it. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Anthony Magnabosco, but it can be useful. And of course, you can use however many other analogies you want, number of chickens in your backyard, or anything like that, to think about how truth relates to your beliefs.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. Yeah, so where are you based out of?
Central Maryland, right between
Okay,
DC and Baltimore.
East Coast. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just curious about that. This is, I mean, in the, for lack of a better word, spirit of being a street epistemology learning environment. What is your definition of street epistemology?
Yeah. So this is one thing that's really common in street epistemology, is going over definitions, right? So this is good practice. I think for me, I would describe street epistemology as a technique for having conversations which involves, number one, charitable listening and trying to understand the other person's perspective on a claim through questioning uh, and repeating back what you hear and focusing on the reasons for their belief and trying to establish what would shift if there's testable reasons, testable experiments they might be able to think of that could shift their belief in one direction or the other. I don't think it should be about changing minds, but that can often be a consequence of having conversations, that people's beliefs can shift as they reflect on their own reasons. But fundamentally, it's a conversational technique to understand other people's perspectives better and their reasons for how they believe or what they believe and why.
Got it. Great. Um,
And feel free to
there's
throw in anything else that you've heard for alternative definitions that maybe I didn't cover.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I guess one analogy that I use sometimes to kind of demonstrate that definition is just showing them this picture of the ferry boat here on my above my name, and that so we have a lot of ferry boats here in this region that crisscross the Puget Sound, takes people uh, on their commutes to work or just to get one from one place to the other. And basically, um, I'm I'm interested. So a ferry boat is a method that somebody uses to get from one place to another, much like epistemology is the method somebody uses to arrive at a conclusion. And I'm interested in the reliability of your ferry boat, like the person that has arrived at a conclusion. I'm interested in the epistemology that they use to get there and how reliable that epistemology is. So if we're both using the same ferry boat and you're ending up in Seattle and I'm ending up in Bremerton, is that a problem for you? And if not, why not? Um, so that would be one way that I can kind of describe it with a real life scenario. Uh, does that resonate at all with you?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy that analogy. The questions that come to my mind with that is, do you see yourself like evaluating the different uh, methods that you learn about, or are you assessing your own at the same time? Are you trying to judge some as good or bad or anything like that?
Well, I want to use a reliable ferry boat. I want to use a reliable way to arrive at conclusions. And if I find out that your ferry boat is very reliable, then I want to use it too. And and if if we examine the reliability of your ferry boat and um if you have good reasons to think that your ferry boat isn't as reliable as you thought, I think that it's important for you to know that if you're interested in coming to conclusions that are more likely to align with reality. Um, because what we believe and what we think is accurate affects our behavior, and that affects the rest of us. So I think that's what makes it important to talk about this stuff. Um, so does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so, and I think I'm in the same boat, so to speak. Uh, I- if I could stretch the analogy, what would it kind of sounds like there's like a threat of sinking, right? What what do you view as that equivalent threat for knowledge claims or methods of knowing things?
Yeah, I see it less of a threat of sinking and more of a threat of ending at the wrong place, ending at the wrong town, or ending at the wrong conclusion.
Yeah,
So yeah, I haven't really thought of it being as like a sinking situation, but that's really interesting, and I'm gonna have to think about that and how that can be added. Uh, yeah. So yeah,
sure.
that's
Yeah, I'm just
that's good.
imagining people like one person might be like, "Oh, I just need to patch up my ship a little bit," but maybe at some point you just abandon ship and jump over to the other ferry. Yeah. No, it's a fun one.
Yeah. Use a more reliable ferry if you're convinced that the other one is more reliable, that kind of thing.
Um, David, so I guess I do just a quick reset.
Yeah, let's do a reset and hopefully we'll get some questions from the audience here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so for everyone in the audience, we're currently in the Q&A session. Uh, if you would like to come up on stage and ask a question to our guest, Brendan, or anyone on stage, you can go ahead and raise your hands and we'll bring you on stage. You can also send me a back channel message and I'll ask the question on your behalf if you do not want to come on stage. Currently, we're also well, David, are we okay with examining any beliefs? Is that
Oh, I would love to
an,
do that.
yeah? So if anyone has a belief or a claim that they have and they hold true, that they would like to have examined, also feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you on stage for questions. Thank you.
And and while people are thinking about that, this is actually one of the challenges too for me of street epistemology is I don't want to lead people to particular topics to discuss. I want them to come forward with topics. And the choice of words I use, even the slightest wording, I think can seed ideas of what they think I want them to come up with. So I've sort of strayed away from using the word belief too much because I think that tends to lead people to think about supernatural claims. So I like the term, just consider something that you think is true about the world or something you think is very important that you want other people to know or that other people look at you funny for thinking or talking about. Those kind of things I feel like are a little more open and broaden the applicability of street epistemology.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. Um, I've been using the word belief a lot less myself, and most of the time I replace it with a conclusion or a conscious assumption to kind of remove that baggage of what the word belief might bring into a conversation. Um, do you want to talk about that a little bit more? There's some other words um, that I'm really that I really think about twice when using them. Another one would be to know or have knowledge. I've been replacing that with having a certain amount of confidence in or being convinced of. Um, are there any other ideas like that that you've been kind of kicking around?
Yeah, just in terms of like words that like give me red flags, sort of, or maybe not quite red flags, but as you say, you're having second thoughts about how you use them. Well, even before Esee, I've had lots of thoughts about the word theory, because in science, of course, theory is used very differently than how the public would use it kind of colloquially. So a theory in science, right, is this the highest sort of state that you can get, where you have a model that has been consistently uh, giving accurate predictions based on all the evidence, all the tests you can throw at it, right? That's what a theory is. So you have the theory of gravity, you have the standard model is actually a theory of quantum mechanics. And there's the theory of evolution that has been tested many times and made successful predictions. But then, of course, theory, a lot of people use that word as just an idea or a hypothesis. So that's one that I've always think twice about. Another one that that I try to avoid now is asking if something's possible. Like the question, do you think it's possible that so and so? So I see multiple problems with the way that question is worded, because, well, first of all, do you think it's possible is a closed form question. It's a yes or no, right? So in Esee, we usually try to have the questions be open ended, and also by saying, "Is it possible?" It's like, well, sure. I mean, isn't anything possible? Well, no, not necessarily. Not everything. I don't think everything is necessarily possible, but that's kind of the approach that a lot of people will take to respond to that question. So I like the replacing that confidence in there with, or how likely is it that this is the case, or how did you rule out other explanations, that sort of thing.
Yeah, theory is a great example of that. Kind of a tricky word to maybe use a different word if there's one out there. As far as the possible one, are you familiar with the SE survey that 20, I
Yeah.
think it's 24, yeah. So I think number 24 is it's possible that my beliefs are not, or it's possible that I hold beliefs that are not true.
Right.
It could be worded differently, but that's basically the idea.
Mhm.
How would you change that statement to um, to use a
I
better
think,
word than possible?
yeah, I think maybe just say, and I haven't thought about that example, but that's a great one. And I know that one of the people who uses that SE survey the most often, Nathan, he's got excellent channel too. If you want to look up Abstract Activist on YouTube, I'd encourage all of you to subscribe there. Um, but yeah, I think for that question, I would rephrase it as, it is likely that I hold some false beliefs or something to that effect. I think that would still get across the point, and avoid that very slim chance. It shifts it from being, this ever so slight possibility of being wrong to, no, actually, I probably do have false beliefs. In fact, I'd say almost certainly I have false beliefs, if I were to answer that question. I just don't know which ones they are, and that's why we have these conversations.
Yeah, totally. Um, so let's say that somebody from the audience here wanted to have one of their conclusions or conscious assumptions examined. Um, what what would a conversation like that look like if it were successful? What are some signs of a successful SE engagement? with somebody?
Sure. I'm gonna use Dolly's response of keeping a very low bar and saying having good rapport at the end of the conversation. I think that having a good conversation, if people enjoyed the conversation, that's successful. So that's number one. Everything else is kind of icing on the cake afterwards. The higher level goals would be critical thinking, and so looking for signs of critical thinking would be if you hear comments like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or I'm going to have to look that up, or that's an interesting idea, or aporia is the phrase often used, where someone's just pausing and there's just silence, and you just stay quiet for a minute while someone's actively thinking. That's a nice sign as well. If they make you think as the interviewer, if you are the person asking the questions, if you find yourself thinking deeper about a topic, that's also really wonderful. So there's a lot of different ways of success, but fundamentally having a positive conversation with someone is the base level.
Got it. So you do a lot of recording of your own conversations, and I do as well, especially these rooms. And I go back and listen, um, and I see a lot of benefits in recording and going back and listening. What are some of the benefits that you see by recording the conversations?
Well, I think that finding out when you misinterpreted something, and recognizing when you failed to correctly listen, or that maybe you said something in a way that could be interpreted in multiple ways, that's really helpful. um, it's I've been on the other end of this too. I had a conversation with Reed from Cordial Curiosity, and also just saying that now, I realize that I'm doing one of these things of unintentionally name dropping. I don't mean to name drop. It's just I have so much respect for all the people out there doing this stuff. Um, but having done a conversation with Reed where I was expressing my beliefs, and then listening back to the questions he asked and how I responded, I realized, like, I wasn't actually maybe addressing the question as it was intended, I think. And it's good for recognizing that, sometimes we may need to rephrase questions, um, or just take that extra moment to really listen, that can be beneficial. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of benefits in recording. It's so much is about that, taking that time to self-reflect, that maybe you don't get in the moment, but we try to work on.
Yeah, it's absolutely appropriate to name drop here. Um, yeah, we like to um, support our community, so yeah, don't no worries about that. I did, however, I'm interested in some of the things that you do before you start the conversation. Like there's this idea of having understanding your goals before you go and start a conversation. I was wondering what are some of the things that you do or think about um, bef before you even start the conversation itself. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that whenever I'm starting a conversation, I don't know. Of course, I usually don't know what the topic is if I'm just out on the street asking for people to interview. But the goal remains the same for pretty much all of those, and that's to understand someone's perspective and how they come to the conclusions that they arrive at, and hopefully act like a mirror to the person I'm interviewing so that they can see reflected in me what their own reasons are, and if they agree that I've expressed their reasons clearly enough, then that is then I've accomplished a goal there. I think that you can have other goals as well, like if you know the topics in advance. So I had a recent conversation that was not recorded. It was sort of a private conversation about a work-related relationship issue, and I wasn't clear on what the goal was, and so that's what I actually asked. That was my first question in the conversation: is what should our goal be in this conversation? What kind of outcome would you like to have? So that's the other thing that you can do, is aside from having your own goals, you can see what your conversation partner has for goals, and then if there's a topic that's maybe you're concerned about someone related to health, for example, with all of the vaccine hesitancy things. Maybe some people are concerned about people who are taking the vaccine because they think they're going to get hurt by taking it, or maybe there are people concerned that you're not taking the vaccine and you're going to get hurt because you didn't take it, right? So in those cases, maybe the goal is to have good health for the person you're talking about, and that there's an assumption in there that coming back to the title of this room, if people are arguing about vaccines, they may be coming at it from two different assumptions. One, assuming that good health comes from taking the vaccine, and the other person might be assuming good health comes from not taking the vaccine. But they have a shared goal there, right, of good health. So anyways, yes, I think maybe talking a little too long on this one, but there can be a variety of goals in there, and it is important to make them explicit when you can.
Yeah, that speaks to me very clearly. There's so many times that people ask me a question, and it doesn't even have to be about street epistemology. And the answer is very often, well, what's your goal? What's the goal here? What are we trying to figure out? What's your objective in XYZ? So yeah, I definitely can relate to that for sure. Um, what are some signs of an unsuccessful SE conversation for you?
Oh yeah, that's an easy one too, because going along with that base requirement of having a good conversation and having enjoyed the conversation, right? If someone storms away or is frustrated, or feels like they're not being heard, that would definitely be a sign of an unsuccessful conversation. If people get defensive, or anything like that, that can be a bad sign. And I have had a conversation somewhat recently that I haven't posted it yet, although I do plan to, where it was on a political topic that I was trying to, approach delicately and ask questions of the person, and they explored their ideas I could tell they were passionate about it. But at the very end, I asked a common question in Esee of, well, do you have any questions for me? And so they asked what my thoughts were on it, and I expressed my honest opinion, and then the tone of the conversation shifted, and you could hear the passion rise, and it became much more of a debate just immediately following that. So I left kind of jaded, that I was like, I lost an opportunity there to try and, I don't know, exhibit better modeling or something. But so maybe, I guess it was a partial success, because I felt like I got to understand that clarity, but it still ended in a way that I would have preferred it to be different.
Are there any claims that you will not examine?
In public, yes. Like, if there's something that I think is illegal, or something like that, that I would not be willing to have that up on YouTube, of course, or anything like that. In terms of a private one-on-one conversation with someone, I don't think so. I think that's a good question. I don't think I would have any limits, with perhaps the exception that if I am putting some other value in front, like preserving the relationship with the person. So I mentioned the challenges of having friends and hard conversation with friends and family. If there's something that I think, that they that by having this conversation, it could end the relationship, that might be one that I would stay away from. But at the same time, it's always got to be an opt-in thing. You're always looking for consent. So if the person is consenting to having this conversation, and I am also consenting to having the conversation, then at that point, I think if it's a one-on-one private conversation, I don't see a limit on what you could question.
Have you ever had a SE conversation with somebody that struggles with mental health? And if so, how did that go? And if not, why not?
For the if not, you mean if I have not had a conversation with someone with mental health issues, why
If
haven't I? Is that the question?
if you had the option to and you decided not to, what would be some reasons not to?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So this is something that I came across pretty early on when I started recording, and had a conversation with someone with strong beliefs in Christianity, and it made me question at the moment if this person was struggling with mental health issues, and I had lots of conversations with some other street epistemologists, but which was really helpful, and people who are more experts in mental health than I am. And some of the important points I think that came out of that for me, that really did shift my position, is that I'm not really one who can judge whether someone speaking to me is speaking to me because of some mental difficulties they're having. If they're expressing these beliefs, it may be completely unrelated to maybe mental health issues that they are having, and that we can't stigmatize these things and not allow people to participate fully in society, because they have these other struggles in their life. That would be doing them a disservice to not engage with them just as much as anyone else. So if there was a situation where I thought that this person's belief was protecting them from harm, we could ask that and ask them, well, what would happen if this belief was questioned, or if this claim was questioned, and if they express the idea that they may harm themselves or anything like that, if their belief was changed or challenged. And see, now I'm using that word belief because I'm reflecting on that conversation I had where it was about a religious claim. But in those situations, I would probably shy away from it, but it would be at the person I'm having the conversation with. It would be at their discretion as to how far we went down that road. If they still wanted to have the conversation privately, I think I would be willing to engage still.
Yeah, it sounds like that um, all kind of falls into that same um, idea of consent. Like just asking them, uh, is it okay if we talk about this? Is it okay if I ask you some questions about it? Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I like how you added consent into that. Yeah, go ahead, Early.
Yeah, so I think that this is an interesting topic, actually. So, first of all, just a very 10-second reset. Everyone in the audience, if anyone has a question or comment on street epistemology, feel free to raise your hands, and we'll bring you on stage if you have any questions. Or you can also send me a back channel message, and I'll ask the question on your behalf. So, in regards to something that Brendan just said, we actually had someone. It was in the atheism club, though, where it was exactly what you said, Brendan. This person had overcome a very like a life crisis where he actually had attempted suicide, and a way out. The way that he found a way out was actually through a belief in God. And I remember it was just like a style debate. I don't know that the gentleman necessarily understood fully what was going on, but at one point, I remember I back channeled all of my friends, telling them that like we should be careful. The reason why this person did not go through like another attempt according to something that he said was because of a belief. And I feel like if I ever found myself talking to someone like that, I would definitely tread carefully to not go and move too many things around when it comes to that belief, because it was literally how he overcame a life crisis that he was going through. Yeah. And I'll say one other thing, but Brendan, if you want to react to that, go ahead.
Sure.
And I'll go after you.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say treading carefully, I think, is always good advice. But it's hard to know like what people will react to sometimes, because maybe what they really need is to be heard, and maybe they need someone to talk to, and maybe by not engaging them, that's also causing harm, right? And so, as you say, treading carefully, I'm 100% with, and maybe that's the balance you strike, is you just be a listening ear and maybe don't challenge things as much as you normally would. And
Right.
street epistemology often does it isn't as like debatey as some other conversation techniques. So a challenge challenging someone's beliefs in Esee amounts to asking them very fairly gentle questions, I think. But even that you can still dial down a little bit. So yeah, you can continue from
Yeah,
there.
yeah, no, exactly. And I did say thread carefully, purposely, because it doesn't mean I necessarily cut off the conversation and we stop talking. But this particular conversation was in fact something that was very important to him. And after learning that, I don't know, I felt a little bit that that we needed to be more cautious in the way that we were talking to him. The second thing is, which I think you guys might have touched on this before, is um, it doesn't necessarily have to be even someone being in a sort of mental health issue, but it could also just be the state of mind they're in at the moment, or whatever emotions this conversation elicits. Because I have been in conversations where otherwise not in a situation where I detect mental health issues, but just someone getting maybe too excited or emotional over the conversation and not being aware of the effect that this conversation is having on the other person is also a problem. And I would highlight that as another thing that one should do when having an SE conversation, or even if it's a debate, right? Read and understand where the other person is at before you continue to kind of ask questions, or pursue a certain point. This is something that I personally kind of learned um, myself with a friend that, about a year later, I learned that a conversation that we had had in the past kind of put him into a bit of a crisis, because he walked out of a conversation we were having with doubt uh, in his faith. And then at the same time, he was feeling guilty for having this doubt. And I remember that I completely ignored the signs that this person did not want to keep talking. And I'll land the plane with this. Sometimes I don't know, especially when having a debate, right? Like, sometimes a person that has a belief may feel compelled to reply or defend his position because we've cornered them or because of the position we put them in, but they no longer want to be in the conversation. They no longer feel comfortable. Um, and so I guess being careful with that as well.
Yeah, this would be a great question for that I'd like to ask a lot of people is what signs do you look for outside of just an explicit consent? Are there signs that you can look for that somebody is uncomfortable with a conversation and wants to end it early? What indicators would you look for? And I'm sure it's even more difficult if you're in like a voice only channel like this because you don't have that body language. Um, but that would be something that would be useful information to have. But also, you'd like some way of testing that, right? If you are assuming every time that someone crosses their arms that is a signal that they want to end the conversation, like how do you verify that idea? How do you determine the reliability of that indicator, right? You could SE a whole that whole claim as well. And yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, and it actually ties into the next question I was going to ask. But before I do that, on the subject of mental health, if there's anyone in the audience that is a mental health professional and could help us understand this question better, I would really appreciate it if you came up and helped us out with this, because I think it's an important subject to be really clear about, and I would really love advice about using SE uh, with somebody who's struggling with mental health, or how to help people have better conversations with people that are struggling with mental health. And Brendan, you were talking about, how do we tell? What are some signs that we can pick up on that can let us know that somebody is uncomfortable having the conversation or wants to end it? And my question was about, so I basically put conversations in like these four categories, and the first category would be texting. Then we have audio, like we're doing now, and then we have like what I would call like the Zoom method, where you have audio and video, but you're not necessarily in person. And then we have the fourth one being an in-person conversation. Um, what is your preference with that? And what are some advantages and disadvantages with some of these categories of platforms for having a conversation?
Sure. Yeah, and I don't know, maybe you should add Morse code in there or something like that. I feel like binary should be something more on the spectrum. Virtual reality.
Yeah,
We'll
feel
add
free
some
to
more.
yeah, feel
Yeah.
free to add your own categories. We could put
Yeah,
like virtual reality, exactly, because it's a little bit better than Zoom.
that's right. Well,
It's
actually, I
not
don't
ex
know if it is.
well,
Yeah. Yeah,
I guess that's debatable.
virtual reality is an interesting one. I heard some commenters who I haven't done an Esee in virtual reality yet, but I think one of the issues is that you don't get the facial expressions. You get a face, and maybe you can get some body movements, but you actually don't have expression, which I think we take so much from people's facial expressions. So that does help. It gives an advantage for even just doing Zoom. And certainly, I think my preference is for in person. Um, I think anytime I can have a conversation in person, that's that's ideal for me. In terms of disadvantages for in person, I would say it is that uh, that feeling of obligation to continue a conversation. There were some interesting studies about small talk that came out a few years ago, or conversations in general. Actually, I think it might have been just last year. I'll see if I can uh, track down the research article, but basically, some scientists did an experiment to see uh, at what point people wanted to end a conversation and compared it to what point the conversation actually ended, and essentially in-person conversations seem to always go longer than either party wanted, which I thought was kind of funny. Um, and and that's not to say that that's necessarily exclusive to in-person conversations. I'm sure that happens in all different media. But like if it's a text form, it's much easier to just walk away and people can presume the best intent of they got distracted, but maybe they were just done with the conversation. Whereas if you're in an in-person situation, it's like no, they really got to walk away, um, so there's that aspect of things. I think that uh, the advantage that Zoom and all these internet-based ones have is just the reach, right? That I can have a conversation with my siblings in another country, um, and that's great to have that opportunity, as opposed to just having to converse with people who are in my local area. So yeah, there's a lot there for sure.
Yeah, I think it's pretty 50-50 split down the middle from everyone that I've talked to. Some, as far as texting goes, like some practitioners are all about it. They're like, heck yeah, I'll have an SE conversation over text anytime. And then there are some folks that are like, I will never do it again. It's the worst thing ever. It's so frustrating. I'm not into it at all.
Super
And
slow too, I think. I find the text maybe I'm just a slow typer, but like it takes me at least twice as long compared to a voice conversation just to write out stuff.
Sure, yeah. And there's kind of a flip side to that too, though, I think, because you're having a conversation at your own convenience. Like you said, obligation, you're not obligated to answer right away. And I struggle with that because I see a lot of advantages of the ability to stop and think about what the other person just said or what you're planning on saying. Um, and it seems like if I have the opportunity to, okay, so what happens a lot of times is I'll start writing a reply and then I'll read it a couple of times and I'll say, does that really adequately convey the message I'm trying to give them? And I'll erase it and rewrite it a different way that in a way that I feel is more accurate, or maybe more empathetic. Um, and so, what do you think about that? Like, I, uh, if I'm having an SE conversation over text and I'm able to word the question in the most ideal way, at least from my perspective, would you say that that's an advantage?
Yeah, so I think that could be certainly an advantage, but at what cost, right? So fundamentally, I do think it relates back to time. And if it takes more time and you just get to ask fewer questions, maybe the back and forth that you would have in a voice conversation that leads to more progress in understanding, or maybe it just generates some ideas, or maybe there's a certain amount of self-correction to the conversation because of the back and forth that you can have more rapidly. um, I I think that that's another one that would be interesting to try and evaluate. Like, how do we determine which method, you know, how much better is one method than the other? If either are better, or if any, if you were to rank them, how might we rank them? Uh, and I don't know the answer other than I guess I'll do the very bad uh, methodology of going with my gut, and my gut instinct is I really enjoy face-to-face conversations.
Yeah, I guess if it's either having an SE conversation over text or not having the conversation at all, maybe that would be another
Sure,
reason
yeah,
to
that's also
do it.
an option.
Early, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I had a a response from someone in the audience regarding the mental health question or comment that we made earlier, and I just want to read that back. Person is not necessarily a mental health professional, but I guess they do have a lot of experience. So, yeah, so I'll just real quick read back what they said, David. Um, what I would say primarily is that if you find you're engaging with someone who is actually disconnected from reality, then you should probably discontinue the conversation. Just because once you become meta, you're likely to give off that impression and get more cagey unless it's addressed directly. That's going to contribute to an issue unless you're willing to change the purpose of the discussion to learn more about their experience only. Oh, right, right. And I'll, yeah, go ahead, David. I'll respond.
Oh, I was just gonna say I really appreciate whoever wrote that. Thank you. And if you want, even though you said you're not a mental health professional, um, I wouldn't mind if if you came up on stage and wanted to talk about that more, if you want to. If not, that's okay. I was just gonna put that welcome out. Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, that was Kelly, and I'll bring her up right now. And so I wanted to say after that, hey Kelly, there was a gentleman, Scully. He came up. I think one of the most interesting rooms that we've had is when the gentleman Scully, I think Scully Maywood, I think is his name. He came on stage and asked the most interesting question. He asked a question where it was really hard even for me when I first started to kind of reason where this person is coming from. And what he was trying to do was trying to see how would an SE practitioner engage with someone that is completely disconnected from reality. And what I learned from that session that we had was that you don't have to necessarily ground or have a conversation with someone that's grounded in reality. You can go into their imagination along with them, and you can still ask questions, even if the whole thing is imagination, right? Even if the whole thing is in his head. And so that was something that I was kind of I was curious about, and we actually answered that. I feel a bit apprehensive in repeating the question that he gave, but the, he basically said, "What if someone came up to you and asked you, do you and said that they believe in oral sex?" That was the comment, and we the panel paused for a little bit when he asked that, but the guest asked a few more questions, and it was basically an exercise in getting into the imagination of this person, regardless of how disconnected they were, and asking questions like that. And so I think that was something that one way that I kind of learned on how to deal with someone that may be a bit disconnected from reality. But yeah, Kelly, welcome to the stage.
I
Hi.
just wanted to add to that, Kelly, if you don't mind, just a second. I think that's the approach I take. And I think we've had some very, I mean, the most interesting conversations, because the reaction you get from a group that's, a skeptics group is usually, oh, so you believe you can talk to God, or also you believe you, there was a guy who we met who said, I have telepathy with some AI, and when people start, you know, bombarding them with questions and kind of destroying them, we lose potentially an amazing experience of going through of sharing the journey of someone who's having this trip, right? Who's tripping like that, and I say it confidently because I've had psychosis and I've tripped. So I think that's why I kind of push people to kind of simmer down and engage with someone who, at least in my assessment, seems to have lost contact with reality. Go ahead.
I keep trying to hit my mic and I hit the stupid messenger instead. Yeah, I mean, the only reason I would say it depends on how comfortable you are and how willing you are to go down that rabbit hole. And the reason, so the whole point of what I was trying to get at is that if there is a concern with someone being a danger to themselves, that is when it might become a problem. Not because I think that people with mental illness cannot like willingly engage in a conversation. That's not what I was trying to say. Just that if you don't feel comfortable, and you feel as though continuing this conversation is going to make you cagey and make you uncomfortable, I'd encourage you to learn more about it. But the whole point is to, when a psychologist is engaging with someone with mental illness, they understand mostly what is happening in the brain. They have, I'm not saying this universally because some psychologists are garbage, but there are more reliable methods for following questioning, de-escalating, and doing all of these things. They're supposed to be trained in that. And also, if something does go bad, then most of them have proper access to resources that can help them if something goes sideways. So that's really the only point that I was trying to make in terms of whether or not you want to continue engaging in a conversation, because rather than trying to, it's at that point that if you are trying to sort of assert a perception of reality and ask questions based on that, it would be entirely subjective to the circumstance of whether or not you should keep going down that path. And if you don't know, then I would say the best case scenario is just continue with a more strict version of Esee, which is just trying to understand their perspective instead of going in a specific direction. Because most people walking around are not a danger to themselves. It's just determined, depending on how you come to this conclusion, does that sort of make sense, or am I just rambling now? Sorry.
No,
Just a
that
quick
makes
question.
sense.
Kelly, what does cagey mean? I'm sorry, new word for me.
Sorry.
What is cagey?
Cagey, just like apprehensive, kind of not giving off a lot of information. Like if you suddenly become uncomfortable about something and stop talking as you normally do, it's like you're trying to withhold information and seeing where things go. It's just someone that you're coming across as not being entirely truthful.
Okay, thank
Or at
you.
least that's the perception.
So what I'm getting is one reason to not engage in a street epistemology conversation with someone that is struggling with mental health is if you're convinced that doing so would cause them to cause harm to themselves. Is that?
Not necessarily. So the danger to themselves is more of just sort of like a not an ideal, but sort of like a standard of the whole point of clinical psychology is to not cause someone to cause harm to themselves. Anytime that someone goes into seeking mental health therapy, you're going to find a bunch of people saying, are you going to hurt yourself? Have you thought about hurting yourself? Have you thought about hurting about anyone else? Like that's a question that I get asked before every therapy session I've ever had. So the whole point is it's if you look at it kind of like triage, the whole field of mental health is, are you going to hurt yourself? Are you going to hurt anybody else? No. Okay, well then maybe we can, like, let's go to the next thing then. What's the next most important thing? Do you have really bad habits that are going on right now? Are you, are you, is your behavior within the last couple weeks been problematic? Kind of like, are you unable to sleep? Are you drinking a lot? Are you, do you have, do you feel worthless? Do you feel all of these different things? So all I'm trying to say in terms of if you are a layperson trying to engage with someone in terms of SE, if you feel uncomfortable, this comes down to kind of like consent, or not kind of like, it comes down to consent. So if you feel comfortable continuing to ask questions, because we're not just talking about the person who you're engaging, we're also talking about your consent. You should be consenting to the conversation if you are engaging with someone that you don't know. As soon as you don't feel comfortable engaging with someone anymore, then either disconnect yourself from the conversation or change the conversation to something that you are comfortable with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks. No, I really, everything you're saying resonates. That makes a lot of sense. It's something that I think I would, I certainly wouldn't ever start a conversation by asking if they were going to harm themselves. But if it got to the point where that's a question that pops up in my mind, that, wait, is this person going to harm themselves or others? You know, maybe that is something I would
Yeah,
ask in
definitely.
that,
And
in the
I'm not
conversation.
encouraging, I'm not necessarily encouraging anyone to ask a question like that, because what
Yeah.
would you do with the answer? You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
And
Yeah,
you'd also don't want to, if someone is sort of like on the verge, if you're now making them aware of it, that's another problem too. And you are
sure.
not
Not
necessarily
trained for that. Yeah,
trained for that, or have access to, or immediate access to, the resources that you need in order to address it. So
yeah.
not necessarily asking them if they're going to hurt themselves, but yes, if that is something that you become concerned about, that like you're starting down this conversation and it's going down like a weird direction that you weren't expecting, then that's when you can reconsider if you are comfortable having this conversation. Because like, for example, the silly ink blot tests that shows up in a lot of pop culture from the last like 50 years.
Yes, yeah.
So
The Rorschach test.
the Rorschach test, yes. So the whole point is not if you see something that is disturbing, because some of them can be very disturbing looking. The point is that if it's a symmetrical thing and you say it looks like a unicorn riding a T-Rex, and that is not a symmetrical thing. You know what I mean? So like it's a um if you say it's like the butterfly of death, then your brain is working properly,
Right, right.
relatively. If you're saying that it is something that does not remotely resemble what's going on, it's just a stimulus. It's not, what they're looking for is the way in which you respond that is not, which is why they don't use it anymore, because it's way too ingrained in pop culture. So anyway, yeah, that's
That's
sort of if that makes.
that's super interesting, and that's a great example of how the differences between lay people and people trained in psychotherapy and things like that. You know, that's I really appreciate you coming up and talking about that. And fortunately, this is a very, very small, rare chance that someone would encounter this situation. And as you said, the vast majority of people, even if they do have uh, any number of mental health issues, can still have a great, engaging conversation that would be beneficial to to anyone. So the video that came to mind as we were talking about this was one from Quinn Questions, recorded a few years ago, well, 2020. If you go to Quinn Questions on YouTube and look in his channel for a video called Sky Juice, all one word, that was the person named themselves Sky Juice. And he says, "I was born black and I am Jesus." Quinn has a really good conversation with them, even though they are pretty clearly not grounded in what we would consider reality. But I think Quinn did an excellent job of listening to this person. And there was a really interesting conversation on Discord about the morality or ethics of sharing that to the public. And that was kind of that discussion is one of the things that formulated my views on engaging with as many people as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, for coming up. Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. Wow, I've I've learned a lot in the last 15 minutes. Yeah, did you have any other questions or anything else that you wanted to comment on, Kelly, while you're here?
No, that's totally fine. I'll move myself back to the audience.
Sure thing. Yeah, so on that, we've got about 15 or so minutes left before we end the room. So if you've been thinking about coming up and asking a question, now would be the time. On that, Brendan, you've been in this room a few times before, right? You,
Yeah, just
yeah,
listening in, and took me a while to figure out how to use Clubhouse, but I think I got the hang of it.
cool. I was wondering if there were any questions from previous rooms that you've heard that you wanted to help answer, or maybe clear up, or anything like that. Maybe comment on maybe some criticisms or something from some other rooms that you were
I
kind of.
remember, I think last week uh, there were a lot of interesting criticisms about Esee that came up, um, and I think that it was handled pretty well at the time, but a couple things that maybe could have been emphasized even more is that street epistemology, although it originated in atheism, the term did, it's definitely not meant to be exclusive to those claims about the supernatural or religion or God or anything like that. And so, um, I it's not it's meant to be used for all claims in general. I think that that's sort of the modern evolution of the practice. So that's one thing I like to emphasize, and it's something that I always feel like I have to get out of the way when I am introducing Esee to other people. If I'm trying to teach them about it, I have to be like, okay, it originated here, but it's not that anymore, or it's gotten much bigger. It's not only that, I should say. Um, and I run into the same thing with astronomy, because astronomy started. I teach astronomy, and so it started in astrology, right? And a lot of people mix those things up. But astrology is something entirely different, with its own belief system that is not demonstrated or well founded. Uh, but fortunately, that separation between astronomy and astrology, that's taken a few hundred years to get separated, and we're only talking about 5 years or so away from when Esee started as really exclusively being applied to religious claims. So we got some time to shift away from that. And I think uh, the other comment that last week came up was about how do you, just by acknowledging any beliefs that are incorrect or any conclusions that are maybe not justified, by exploring these ideas with them, maybe you're causing them to create justifications. Maybe you're solidifying these, and I thought that was an odd criticism, because it sounded like by exploring an idea and shining light on the reasons people are coming to their conclusions, that you might solidify the wrong ones. But I'm wondering, how else would you correct them? Like, what other method would you have to come to the right conclusions without examining them? So, anyways, those were a couple thoughts just from the most recent last week one.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Um, I, there's not much to say that Brendan didn't already say. I was a bit taken back also by the criticisms and the things that were being highlighted as a problem with SE. One of the things that I like and that I feel that I feel that are being introduced as a problem. It seems like any time that we or that someone doing SE takes into consideration another matter or another thing that maybe often we ignore during other conversations, it, we're trying to kind of highlight that as oh well, the SE needs to do that. Well, that must be there must be a problem with SE. And I actually, David, I actually got a comment about this earlier, um, where and I'll actually take this moment to kind of share that. Comment said it is strange that SE requires asking questions and repeat people's answers to start and continue a dialogue. Seems to me that this is a weakness of SE, which offers no strategy to build a dialogue. Yeah, no, comments like that, I am mostly confused by them more than anything, like I've said before.
Do you want to respond to that comment, Brendan?
Yeah, it sounds like, if I'm understanding the comment correctly, maybe the concern is about how there's a tendency in SE to be more of a one-directional thing as opposed to a dialogue of back and forth. Do you think that's what they're going at early?
My impression, it just seems that it's literally about responding with repeating the other person's answers as a way to continue a dialogue, is what they say.
I see, as
Starting
in
continuing dialogue. Yeah.
that's not an effective way to continue a dialogue by repeating something.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so I think this is actually a great example of what we just did, because I just repeated what I thought I heard, but it wasn't quite what was intended, perhaps. And so that allows for self-correction before we continue the dialogue. It's almost like a check-in. So while I agree, if we were only repeating back this exact same phrasing we heard, yeah, that wouldn't be very effective.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that it is one of several tools that you can use in making sure you're understanding things correctly before you ask questions to explore how they got to those conclusions.
And I would use a very common response that I use, and that would be, what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to understand the other person better? Or is your goal for your conversation partner to better understand themselves and the way that they arrived at a conclusion? So I think in order to decide what's better, we need to understand what the goal is to begin with. Because if we're not clear on the goal, it's really hard to tell if something is effective or not, right?
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
Uh, uh, uh,
Go ahead.
I just one last comment on this. There was another comment that was made. It might have been last weekend, where they said that there's somewhat of an ambush that's happening because the person doesn't know or understand what SE is, and so we're kind of ambushing them, right? And that was the criticism, and but it
Yeah,
just made me
right.
think about I mean, I don't bit of a harsh word with the backwardness of the line of criticism, because what I see quite often is people come into a room, especially the atheism room, which is where I've learned the most about these conversations. is where sometimes people come in, they're having a great conversation. All of a sudden, someone comes in, asking them a line of questions, raising their voice, and a few minutes later, the person leaves because they were interrupted too many times. They were raising their voice, or maybe somebody cursed at them, and to me, that feels like an ambush. And it seems like often we're very free to just go in and criticize somebody's views or put down somebody's view, dunk on them, and people end up leaving the conversation because of the way they were treated, right? And to me, that's an ambush. And SE is taking the approach of eliminating all of that out of it, right? And myself, I'm not an SE practitioner. I'm mostly here to facilitate the room. This is just something that I say I'm observing about SE to be an actual truth. We try to eliminate all of those things so that people don't feel ambushed. It's just funny to me that they critique SE by saying that SE is a way of ambushing people. So sorry,
Yeah,
that was venting a little
I
there.
mean, I see the point a little bit from the perspective of you're not necessarily giving people time to prepare a defense, so to speak, of what they believe, or maybe they haven't reflected on the belief. Or see, I'm still using that word belief. David, you call me out when I do that. We talked earlier about how we try to use the word claim or what their thoughts are um, on something, uh, but that's a pretty simple fix, I would think, because if you have a conversation with someone, I do think it's good practice to offer to do a follow up if they're willing, and hopefully you're willing as well, uh, and maybe allow them that time, a few days or weeks, to think about the conversation and come back, and you can address the same topic if you want, or shift to a different one. There's nothing to say that it has to be an ambush style, truly a street interview, but that is just a seizing the day, sort of opportunistic, um, sort of chance to have a conversation. So um, even if that was a reasonable objection, there are ways of mitigating that, I think. Um, but the flip side to another aspect of that is that we're walking around with all of these ideas in our heads, and we're acting on them, acting on the conclusions that we've drawn from some assumptions that we might not be examining. And so even if we're not prepared to think about our reasons, we're acting on those conclusions we've already drawn. Um, and so I think some self-reflection is warranted, even if it's not already been prepared.
Yeah, this is great. So yeah, we just have a couple of minutes left. So last call for question asking. Um,
Yeah, and I
and
would, since we haven't done any like Essie example sessions or anything, I'd be happy to stay a little longer just to do one of those. But if no one is interested in trying it out, that's okay too.
yes, and you can contact us if you want to have a one-on-one at another time. We can always schedule a one-on-one
Good call.
either here on Clubhouse or another platform that you'd like. And before I forget, I also wanted to thank Quaid for being in the room today. Um, for anybody who doesn't know, Quaid also has a YouTube channel called What's Your Argument? Definitely go check that out if you're interested in street epistemology. There's a lot of really good examples of conversations there. So just wanted to shout that out. And also, in case you can't see it at the top of the screen here, Brendan, our guest today, uh, their YouTube channel is called Diamond Discourse. So definitely go check that out as well. Um, and so, yeah, I also just wanted to, again, thank you, Brendan, for being here today. Even though we didn't have a lot of audience engagement, I certainly learned a lot, and we had some great discussions. So thanks again for coming into the room. You're always welcome. I'm thinking about possibly in the future just kind of allowing anybody that wants to come up and be part of the panel to help answer questions. Might be going that route soon. So feel free to come back, join the room, and feel free to be up on this panel to help answer questions. You're welcome anytime and early. Thanks again for facilitating the room. I honestly, I don't think that this room would be run as smooth as it does without you here. Alfonso, always a pleasure for you to be here and in our room. It's always interesting to get your perspective on things, and thanks for your friendship. So yeah, we're probably going to end there, unless anybody else has any last minute
Requests?
yeah.
I want to. So I was running. I told you about this room earlier. Kelly was there about system theory, and I think it would be fascinating. I didn't know when to plug it into the room today. I thought I would, but it would be interesting to have a room on understanding what systems are functioning within us, I guess, within our logic, within our intellect, what affects us, and it's a bit of a complex topic because everything is a system, right? Everything in nature, everything in the human mind, and I find it a very good tool to understand the mechanics of the world and of human thinking. So I just want to implant that seed in your mind and see if we can take it anywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to have a room like that. I want to have a room like that. I want to have some Esee in Spanish rooms. Epistemología de la calle, I think is how you say
Yeah,
it.
so yeah. I looked for a translation, and the one I think Early and I like better is Epistemología Urbana.
Urbana, okay, so urban.
Yeah. It sounds cooler.
Okay.
Yeah, we thought about this before. We briefly talked about it, actually.
Yeah,
Oh,
and there's actually a... Go ahead.
If anyone's interested, go to my profile, and the first, what are they called? No. Replay. The first recording that I have on my profile of a room is the System of Systems room that I ran today. If anyone's interested in digging on that, and I'd like to do some more. Thanks.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's lots to do, and I'd like to do more. So awesome. All right. Anything else?
Thank you all for having me. I really did enjoy the conversation, and I'm sure I'll see you all around occasionally in here, if not on Discord and elsewhere.
And there you have it. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast and want to join the conversation or just listen in, you can find us in the Street Epistemology Club on the Clubhouse app, Saturday afternoon starting at 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Until next time, keep asking questions.